Hello, and welcome to another fully live news episode of Hacking. My name is Kody KIlian. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and we're not doing the Q&A today. We're doing the news with KIlian. Thank you for joining us today.
How's it going? Great to be back again.
Pretty good. So I tried out automating your job on the last stream, and it didn't go so well. I had a giant 3D printed Terminator head that would just react every time I touched a candy bowl, and it was not as fun or entertaining. So rest assured, your job is safe. Experiment has failed.
I mean, you can't prove that I'm not, a Terminator head, just, living skin over a metal skeleton.
That's the point. My crude experiments might have just been scratching the surface. But yeah, so I had an interesting Q&A session last time. I did a little bit of Halloween stuff, and yeah, overall, a lot of fun. We have a lot to cover this week. There have been a lot of interesting cyber attacks. There has also been some more direct fallout from the stories we mentioned last week. So yeah, good to see everybody in the chat. I know we're starting a little bit late today. I'd like to give us a little bit of extra time, especially when it's not just me, on the show. Like,
right.
It's good to breathe a little bit, read through the stories, talk about a little bit. So let's go ahead and get into some of the most interesting ones this week.
Z would like you to lower my volume.
Oh, easily done. Look at that.
Now that we've learned that, we've mastered it.
Yeah, how about that? Let me know. I've reduced the intensity of KIlian down to 60%. Any further risks, like not getting the full flavor across. All right, so here's the first story I wanted to go over this week. We talked, I think, last week about the beginning of this attack, and this was something against a transportation security logistics company, Estes. This is an LTL carrier. LTL stands for less than truckload. So that means that they are carrying like bits and pieces and things that wouldn't fill up an entire truckload. And this is a hot market. I used to work in this market, actually, where there are so many of these partial shipments that need to go out where they don't need their own truck, but there's trucks going by that maybe have capacity. That is the core function of this business, is they are the kind of people that figure out how to take these partially full trucks and make them as full as possible for a profit. Now, that takes a lot of doing and a lot of people and a lot of coordination. And in this case, it looks like that has all come to a screeching halt. And the conditions here are frightening for people who are trying to do business in this space right now. So some of the advice being given by this company is to direct message them on X, formerly Twitter. And there's some other like very, very, I would feel like vulnerable ways of exchanging information for very, very valuable items. And this is an industry that's plagued by a lot of like scams and people trying to like do like phishing stuff. So having all this stuff in a cyber attack start to go over informal channels where it's not clear who you're talking to, there's lots of opportunities for impersonation, is truly shocking. It's really crazy to see the fallout of the cyber attack. So there's a lot of disruption also in this market space right now, according to some of the, some of the banks, I think, Deutsche Bank has weighed in and said that there are tens of thousands of shipments per day that need to find new carriers. So if you can imagine, like, that's like a ton of stuff being moved that now is just up in the air. So it's going to cause a lot of disruption in the market. It's already causing a lot of disruption with the way that people track and are able to like get their equipment across the country. So yeah, this is a super impactful attack.
I was going to say, this seems like recently, I know we've talked about a number of different attacks on ports and logistics carriers and things like that. I don't know if it's a trend, but I've noticed it lately too. I wonder if it's a space where people can do sort of maximum damage and disruption, in general, that's not targeted like at a specific organization, right? Like this is just a general sort of attack on the way we do commerce and business.
Yeah. And this is also, it's a private company, so they don't have to do some of the stuff that other like ransomware cyber attack victims that we've seen before have had to do, which is where they have to come out and they need to give their shareholders some sort of indication of how bad the attack is, what's breached, what's not. And these rules have come into effect pretty recently. But given that they're a private company, we're probably not going to see that. So yeah, it's, again, this is something that a lot of businesses are going to jump on. It's something that a lot of customers are probably freaking out about right now because they have to move all this stuff and they need to move it urgently. So yeah, kind of probably one of the most visible of the cyber attacks that I've been keeping an eye on this week. All right, and in the chat, where is Nullbyte? And why did you leave Nullbyte? I didn't leave Nullbyte, my friend. Nullbyte left me. Nullbyte is called Wonder How To, who got bought by some other company called technologyadvice.com. And if they want to sell me Nullbyte, I'm listening. All right, so let's go on to the next story. So this was another victim of a cyber attack. And when we talk about like impactful cyber attacks, there's a couple industries that stand out. Critical infrastructure and medical is another one where we tend to see anybody that's hit here. And of course, transportation logistics, as we just mentioned, but anybody that's hit that's like a medical institution, you're going to see a lot of fallout here. And some of the fallout from this particular attack was, for one, putting in jeopardy a potential sale to a larger health network, and for two, the inability to bill Medicare for like weeks at a time, and then having to get like a giant, like I think, a $7.5 million advance just to continue operating. So that's huge. Like not being able to have your scheduled surgeries, not being able to have all the stuff that is on a daily basis, very, very critical. And then also having your higher business propositions kind of be disrupted by this. It looks like they are in line to be purchased by a larger healthcare network. And of course, that is, that definitely affects this larger healthcare network now if they're not even able to like bill or perform like basic services. So these sorts of ransomware attacks are hugely devastating on these sorts of customers where it's very, very urgent work that they do. It's something that can't be done remotely or can't be like, subjected to backups that could take weeks to restore. This particular cyber attack, they declared it as over, I think 6 weeks before it was actually over. So a lot of fallout here for companies that are hit by these sorts of, a lot of these are honestly like they're like ransomware affiliates that are kind of all over the place with their ethics, where some of them have been like, we're not going to attack medical places because we don't want the FBI coming after us. So they kind of like pick targets that are like, like businesses that deal with like finance or something where like it's a financial crime, like nobody really gets hurt. But these ones, like these are where people actually get hurt and where rescheduling surgeries or other things can directly lead to like deaths and worse patient outcomes. So
I mean, right there in the screen, it says that they couldn't process X-rays or CT scans. I mean, that's pretty critical to do for the kind of overall health process.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is just kind of a retrospective on like how this attack has gone. It seems as though the attack is over. However, they're still struggling financially now in the wake of the cyber attack. So yeah, healthcare institutions particularly vulnerable to these types of ransomware affiliate gangs. All right, so we've been talking about this for a while now. This is the first cyber attack that I can say I found out about on TikTok. Just because people at the casinos immediately realized that something was wrong, especially like locals and people that frequent the strip, like saw that like there was something going on a scale that had not really happened before, because the casinos are crazy about uptime and making sure that everything's working. When things start to break, especially a lot of things all at once, people tend to know that something's going on very early. So this was a huge cyber attack, and this was the Alpha ransomware gang. This apparently is going to cost MGM Grind about $100 million, which honestly seems super low to me. I don't, maybe, just the scale of how much these casinos make and all the things that were down and kind of the reports I was seeing, that surprises me actually. Like I honestly thought it would be more. Obviously that is a vast and stunning amount of money, but like they chose not to pay, and I don't know what the ransom was. Maybe it was more than that. If it was more than that, then maybe they got a deal. But $100 million is a lot. Obviously, they were hit super hard. They were in the news for a while. But yeah, at the other end of this, it seems like they're rebuilding their systems. Most of what I can see, at least from online, it seems that most of their services are back up and running. So it seems like the cyber attack, apparently, like according to what I'm seeing in terms of downtime and everything else, seems to be over in terms of the worst of the pain. So that seems to be the bill from the cyber attack. So lots of publicity here. Like we were seeing this in the news for quite some time because it really was kind of unprecedented for things at a major Las Vegas property to be down like this, losing so much money. But it's interesting to see the final number that they put on the cyber attack being $100 million. So,
I mean, obviously, Kody, you and I aren't insiders, but we probably spend a fair amount of time in Vegas just for conferences and other events and things like that. And the interaction that I get and the impression that I get is maybe it's, 100 million objectively is a lot of money, but maybe it's so low, relatively speaking, because they tend to be very on top of this stuff. At least that's the perception that I get typically dealing with them and working with them, especially because they do host, a number of hacker conferences, right? You're not going to invite DEF CON, for example, into your house, if you will, and not be sure that you have it locked down, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And this was a pretty startling attack. Like, if I remember correctly, these were virtual servers that were encrypted, and that was enough to cause the chaos that kind of like followed suit. We saw some frantic job posting from them, trying to get people to help them get everything back up and running from scratch. So it seems as though, yeah, like casinos are obsessive about their security. They're obsessive about keeping things like up and running. But in this case, like they did manage to still get attacked. And that's just, like it seems like it was social engineering that managed to make this happen, like an initial access broker. And as we reported a couple of weeks ago, sometimes when you have an initial access broker, they'll even sell it multiple times to multiple exploitation groups. So yeah, pretty crazy attack. It's impossible to really know what they were up against. But once that initial access broker was in, the entire marketplace potentially had access to their internal network. So pretty horrific cyber attack. $100 million was the bill on that one, but I feel like MGM, they'll make it back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we have a number of stories this week that actually deal with initial access brokers. That seems to be pretty prevalent, leveraging just really social engineering more than anything to get that initial foothold. I think there was a couple this week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, it's all about kind of like market segmentation now, where like the initial access brokers have figured out that they have a very easy job where they get paid great money to do one thing that they're particularly good at, and they don't get involved in the stuff that ends up getting all the heat. Like nobody's really talking about initial access brokers, whereas like everybody's talking about these ransomware gangs because they're the ones that step into the limelight. Whereas these initial access brokers, they have a pretty sweet deal. And we're seeing that expand as a segment of just kind of like cybercrime, because these initial access brokers can kind of lay low, do what they do, and they might be part of this whole chain. And eventually somebody will go after them. But it's going to be a while because it's really the ransomware gangs that make the big splash. All right, so this is crazy, and I believe this also affects Kali Linux. So hackers, you're going to want to update. You're going to want to do a little update on this one because we got Looney Tunables. So this is a Linux bug that affects a number of different distributions. It has what was the CVE? Come on.
Yeah, I don't remember what the ranking was. I think it was pretty severe.
7.8? Are you kidding me? I don't know, man. I think it should be higher than that, but whatever.
You think higher? Okay.
I'm not on that. So this allows local attackers. So let's say that you open something you shouldn't have, or you download a program that you shouldn't have. This would allow that program to get root privileges by exploiting a buffer overflow weakness in a library that is a critical component of most Linux-based systems. This is the GNU-C library, which is henceforth referred to as glibc. And this is included in most Linux-based systems. So this is going to be Fedora, Ubuntu, Debian, and you can do a bunch of commas and name every Debian-based system, and I imagine they will be affected. And Kali is a Debian-based system, so some friggin' guy was asking me on the Q&A, why not Black Arch Linux? Well, maybe this. I don't see it on the list. So anyway, I'm not saying I don't want to get into the operating system wars, but like sometimes diversity is good. So anyway, I think we have two separate stories of this, but this was just kind of introducing like what the exploit is and why it's called Looney Tunables. It's because you're using a GLC tunables environmental variable while launching binaries. So this is supposed to be with the SUID permission, which is like basically like localized root permission. So it can do what it needs to do, but it can't do anything outside of that. This allows you to break out of that. And that's really the big thing that people are talking about here, because it swiftly got followed with exploits. So immediately security researchers started releasing exploits for this high severity flaw. And this is allowing them to then, use a proof of concept to, pop-up calculator or whatever else you want to do.
Mhm.
My good friend and only person that replied to me back when I started at Nullbyte and was interviewing researchers, Will Dorman, said that this does in fact work. And I believe him because I've been following him on Twitter for as long as I have a Twitter, and he is almost always right. So the fact that there are more proof of concepts out there is obviously a concern to people running Linux distributions. This means that anybody who has the ability to run, just an arbitrary file in your system, maybe something that runs at a lower level, could then escalate and be able to take over your system, or just do whatever they want. So
Right.
definitely a concern, definitely something that needs to be chained with something else, and it doesn't appear to be remotely exploitable. So just connecting your Kali Linux installation to the internet isn't enough to get exploited here. However, you should still patch this because it is a concern and would allow one mistake by you or just a little bit of access by them to potentially give them the fullest possible privilege over your computer, which you don't want. I see a warning from Debian in my VM about cups. Well, you better make sure to update that. All right. That might be CPUs. There we go. All right. So next up, we have ransomware gangs exploiting TeamCity RCE flaws. So this is an active attack against JetBrains TeamCity continuous integration and deployment servers. So this is for like software development teams.
Yeah.
And this has a respectable 9.8 out of 10. So a nearly flawless ice skating routine for this critical vulnerability. So of course, you're going to get from that initial access brokers, like I just mentioned, who are going to go out and blast the internet and gather a bunch of targets to go ahead and resell. So as soon as they have this, it goes on to the ransomware affiliates who basically buy it with the cash that they've saved up, especially if it's a juicy target they anticipate will be easy to exploit. And then they go ahead and do their thing and roll the dice as to whether or not putting themselves in the limelight is worth it to get the big ransom. And then somewhere sitting at the top is the software developer that made the ransomware who gets a cut of the entire thing. So that's kind of how these attacks go. They're pretty predictable at this point. So since this is remotely exploitable and it impacts all TeamCity versions prior to the release, to the patch release, it specifies that it's only on-premises servers, but it's the ones installed on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Those are all the operating systems I know of that they would be running on. So, or that run in Docker. Never mind. There was one I forgot. So that seems like all of them. So attackers could steal source code, service secrets, and private keys, which of course could lead to further exploitation. If you've got keys into people's repositories and stuff like that, it means that you can deploy some of the other sneaky Linux attacks that we'll talk about later, like malicious inclusions where you end up infecting a bunch of projects that rely on this particular library that maybe this group maintains. So we've seen a lot of attacks against these software developers that are working on projects that everybody depends on, and they'll change one library import and then create a malicious library using that import, and it'll look almost identical because it'll use it like typo squatting or like similar looking characters. So that's really what the objective I imagine here is. The ability to do these sort of attacks against people who have relied on a piece of software that these initial targets use or produce rather or maintain. So there are definitely some TeamCity servers that are vulnerable still out there. I think that there were a couple of I think that there were a couple thousand still out there, and it was noted that this is already under attack and that there were 56, I believe, different IP addresses actively targeting internet exposed TeamCity servers.
Fun stuff. The supply chain attacks, again, seem to be a lot of bang for the buck in what we've been seeing lately. I've also noticed this week a lot of ZeroDays, I think, in the stories. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, and of course, you know what that means. Anytime we see emergency patching in 0 days, to me, it means mercenary spyware vendor. Just because that too is an emerging kind of gray market industry where you get people who are finding vulnerabilities and caching them in rather than reporting them to Google or Apple, and then Google and Apple having to issue an emergency patch when it's discovered exploiting someone's device. All right, so moving on. This is my favorite story of the week, I think. So this is a vulnerability in AI servers. So ChatGPT, like all these cool services that are serving up AI models, often need some infrastructure put in place in order to make sure that that's like a scalable thing you can do. So this is often using a tool called PyTorch, and this is something that is, TorchServe is used to serve up PyTorch models in production. So TorchServe is maintained by Meta and Amazon. It's really popular amongst both industry and academic. So you see Amazon, OpenAI, Tesla, Azure, Google, and Intel all kind of relying on these things to make their AI systems scalable and accessible. So the vulnerability allows you to basically upload malicious models if you wanted to. And I think that that is great, or at least super funny. So that means that if you are able to get local, I think this is actually, unauthenticated management interface API misconfigurations that let you send requests to the web portal that manages the overall configuration. So with that ability, you can chain together a couple other exploits to like load a model from an external domain that isn't trusted. So I could just load up my own model, point their servers at it, and allow people that are trying to go to the service to encounter a malicious AI model, my AI model, that's maybe doing something that it shouldn't be doing, like stealing information or giving wrong advice, or like passing information back to another server. So that to me is so cool because like seeing the evolution of these sorts of attacks, like targeting AI, is exactly what we're going to see in the future. So these sorts of initial attacks where it makes it possible to target the infrastructure AI relies on in order to deliver a malicious model, like that is to me some future hacking stuff where like people start encountering, something feeding them bad advice or like, like stealing their information. And it's like, on the official portal list they're supposed to be using. If we find out that somebody uploaded a malicious AI in place of the friendly one, like that'll be like a ridiculous kind of impersonation game where like you'll never know if the AI you're talking to has been replaced with a rogue one that's like trying to like steal from you instead of help you.
This is some I know you're a big fan of Ghost in the Shell. This reminds me of some like first level Ghost in the Shell stuff here where we're this is step one.
Yeah. So beware. Like it appears as though in the future you may be facing malicious AIs that have been loaded by hackers using vulnerabilities like this. All right, next up. So this is one. This is a zero-day vulnerability. 3 zero-day vulnerabilities that were found in Qualcomm GPUs, and this is also mirrored by similar vulnerabilities that were disclosed by ARM today. Or sorry, I think it was a couple days ago. So these were kind of released in conjunction, and the implication here, as far as I understand it anyway, again, seems to be mercenary spyware of some sort. It seems as though this is something that hackers were using to actively exploit in a limited fashion some devices. And Google's Advanced Threat Analysis Group, or TAG, and Project Zero teams discovered several of these CVEs. So during the Q&A on Wednesday, we had somebody in the chat who was like demanding to know if anybody in the chat had CVEs and like dismissing anybody that like did it. It's just funny because like when we talk about CVEs, so many of them are discovered by the same like couple people that work at like Google's Threat Analysis Group and Project Zero, or like the Apple equivalent. Like it's like the same like several people like over and over because it's such a niche and specific group. So obviously these like 0 days are like very important to like certain people, that being like cyber criminals, and then like however many researchers that work at Google's TAG. But primarily in this kind of back and forth, you see two types of people who really care about CVEs, and the cyber criminals are the ones that will go and sell them to something like a mercenary spyware group, whereas one of these researchers will go and turn in a CVE and get credit for it because they're the ones that discovered it in the wild. So it's kind of funny. It seems like if you're somebody that like is really deeply interested in finding these sorts of things, you can either be like kind of sketchy and not care who gets hurt by it and make money on the like gray market, or you can be like somebody who works with one of these threat analysis groups. Now, ironically, you probably won't find many of these like Google tag people doing live streams about the vulnerabilities, because I don't think that by and large they're allowed to talk about a lot of their work until a good amount of time has passed and these 0 days have been fully patched and that's trickled down to many devices. So
It's
yeah,
funny you make that distinction about the sort of the two types of people, and there is a story I think later that we'll touch on that a little bit. And I'll kind of reference back to it. You'll know when we get there.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So these are a series of CVEs that were being used to, as I said, do some limited exploitation of devices. And I think this is the second time that there's been a Qualcomm disclosure within the last six months or so. But oh yes, as I said, also there's a similar ARM advisory talking about likely exploitation in targeted attacks, which again, to me, usually means either like nation state or like mercenary spyware groups. And this is non-privileged users being able to make improper GPU memory processing operations to gain access to an already freed memory. Okay, so like long and short, like you could use this to escalate privilege, and it has been used by some of these groups. So you're going to want to patch these as soon as possible, because as these are patched, they're going to get passed to like sketchier and sketchier companies that sell these because they're not as useful, and you'll start to see them more and more, and they will become like parts of malware that you'll actually start to see as a threat that could be delivered to you as a regular user. This kind of stuff like starts out as like highly exclusive, like only used on a couple people that are very important, and then as they get discovered, they definitely still stay around. They just become cheaper and cheaper for people to buy, reuse, and whatnot. All right, so I really like this. NSA and CISA reveal the top 10 cybersecurity misconfigurations of this year. So that is interesting, because I imagine they're coming at this from kind of polar opposite
sure
like mindsets here, where like the NSA is just like, these are the things we love to exploit,
right?
And then, the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency is just like, these are the things we hate to fix. But this is a list of all the things that tend to be broken most often and can be exploited. So let's go through them in brief. So first we have default configurations of software and application. I have to say, as a hacker, this is probably the number one thing that I look for in a system that I'm evaluating. If something is using default credentials, it is a simple Google search away from being able to be accessed. So because so many people set up a piece of technology and then never bother to configure it, I agree that this is probably the number one thing I encounter. Improper separation of user/administrator privileges. I would say when I'm looking at networks, like having it so that like an average user can like look at the configuration page of like a router or something and like learn details and maybe even like see things they're not supposed to. I see that a lot too. Okay, I believe that. Insufficient internal network monitoring. Yeah, like I have virtually never encountered much like network monitoring. So when I'm doing like weird scans and stuff, nobody ever notices. Lack of network segmentation. Yes, the ability of average random user who you give your Wi-Fi password out to connecting to random services on your network and then like potentially logging in. Like most people just have that enabled by default. Most businesses do too. So it's actually pretty rare I see a business that has network segmentation. Poor patch management. I mean, I just agree. That seems to be a fundamental problem of lack of IT. Bypass of system access controls. Oh, yeah. So you can just like, get around the controls that they have built in. Yes, that's very common. Weak or misconfigured multi-factor authentication methods. I don't encounter this a lot myself, but I imagine the NSA probably knows a lot more about this than I do. Insufficient access control lists on network shares and services. This one's above my pay grade. What do you have to say about
this? It's almost like that's one of the big things that we talk about here at Varonis. I mean, data is just, a lot of times not locked down. Unfortunately, the ACLs aren't aligned to like least privilege or zero trust or whatever the framework is that you're working through. I mean, it's so fundamental. It's as old as time. And again, every year I think this is on the list. Every year we talk about it, and it's
okay. So in layman's terms, this is just when you get in, everything's open to everyone.
Yeah. Pretty much. Okay, cool. I mean,
so there's no access control. You just you have access to everything.
It's the whole basis for why ransomware is so effective, is they, can potentially pop anybody, and then that person could have access to way more than they need, as opposed to, the department or whatever else they're supposed to be working on.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So then we also have poor credential hygiene. So obviously this is something that allows for anybody who has seen maybe like a password that you've used in the past to be able to log into other accounts you have. So I would say that credential reuse is so common amongst people because they just want to be able to remember it. And most people don't use a password manager, that completely makes sense. And then finally, we have unrestricted code execution. Again, not something I really deal with because I mostly go after like network misconfigurations. But as you can see, the NSA is saying that the top 10 most prevalent network misconfigurations discovered during active red and blue team assessments is this. So I can confirm that I see these all the time, especially in like businesses and stuff like that. I think that it's generally kind of expected that these are what you would be looking for, but it is overall not something that I would be surprised by when I do an assessment and see this category of stuff be the number one thing that's wrong with the network. So anyway, just interesting to see these sorts of reports. Like it's in general something that I enjoy, like going over and seeing if what I'm seeing in the environment is like actually what like the NSA or other agencies are like saying is the biggest problem. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so let's talk about Motel 1. Kilian, have you seen kind of the story behind this attack?
Is this, I have to refresh my memory because I read this a while ago. Is this the one where they claimed that nothing got stolen, but then the ransomware group kind of came back and said, no, we got terabytes? Or was that a different organization? I can't remember which one it was, honestly.
This is what I believe that this is a failed negotiation with like one of those exploitation gangs. And in particular, this has been released. So they've had to reach out to customers and be like, okay, before we were saying that there was a cyber attack, now we're saying that like your credit card information has actually been shared. So that's like obviously a kind of like a negative thing to have to share with your customers, that like their current credit card information has been leaked. But I actually confirmed this last night. I went to the Black Hat ransomware leak site and I saw for myself credit card credentials and other sorts of information that were actively being leaked as a result of failed negotiations. So yeah, you can definitely confirm for yourself that this information has been breached. And when this happens, like it's generally like, you know, it's generally something that is the result of a gang that like wasn't able to or doesn't even try to exploit like a vulnerability for ransomware. It's more about like trying to steal the data and then threaten the release of the information to like get money. So in this case, I guess we'll see what happens, but the information out there, this is the end state of one of these attacks, is being able to like, you know, actually see your customers' data leaked out on the internet and then have to like go and talk to them about it. So yeah, we also have a very, very sad piece of news. We reported on this earlier, but Cortana has officially been removed from Windows. This is, of course, being replaced by AI tools inspired by the GPT model. So you should expect to see further integration of AI Bing and some of these other stuff, like some of these other AI tools, because like generally that's where Microsoft is going. There's like a, I guess, trend towards removing some of these like failed, like I shouldn't say failed. Cortana isn't completely failed. I would say like unpopular tools that don't really like have a lot of functionality behind them aside from just automating a couple specific things. Like these are rapidly being replaced, and you should expect some of these other tools to maybe be on the chopping block as well. I don't know what Apple's doing with Siri, but some of these assistants that just never really like caught on as being super useful are definitely going to get an overhaul, and this is just a small example of that.
Yeah, Microsoft is definitely all in, certainly in the corporate world, on replacing. Cortana was never really a corporate thing, even though it was in Teams, but with I forget the name of the tool that they're rolling out. I think it's in the bottom of the article, but they're all in on that. Copilot is what it is, and I've seen a lot of stories about that. They seem to be all in. There's a lot of potential security risks around that too, but that's a whole deep topic. Again, letting it access all of your corporate data to be able to be helpful can lead to some problems.
Definitely. And I think a lot of businesses or even just individuals might not be comfortable with, the amount of information that you're putting through some of these digital assistants in order for them to be useful. So yeah, interesting to see. I will not miss Cortana, but I know maybe some other people will. All right, active attacks. So let's talk about the Atlassian. This is an Australian company that makes Confluence. So Confluence Server has been attacked before. I remember hearing stories about Confluence Server because it's very, very popular and a lot of people use it. This has been actively exploited in attacks, and the statement states they've been made aware of an issue reported by a handful of customers where external attackers may have exploited a previously unknown vulnerability in publicly accessible Confluence data server and server instances to create unauthorized Confluence administrator accounts. So in general, if you have a remotely exploitable vulnerability that allows you to create administrator accounts, that's going to be an issue. This is, what do we got? What's the score? Okay, all right. So that's pretty high. That's pretty high. So 10 is flawless, impressive to see. And generally means that this is going to be something that people are talking about, because whenever you see something like this that is able to be accessed remotely, it's going to be a major target for cyber criminals who are looking to pull off something like the Move It data transfer bonanza that some of these ransomware groups are still going through. So unknown what the impact of this is going to be, aside from that this is a super critical vulnerability that is under active attack. Admins are being given some indicators of compromise. But yeah, stay tuned to this, because we will probably be talking about this in next week's news if some of these attacks are successful and larger organizations that are using these servers end up getting targeted. All right, let's see. So we talked about the Sony data breach 2 weeks ago. But they have gotten more specific, and this is the winner of our who's getting credit monitoring. We do this almost every week. So who's getting credit monitoring this week? So in this case, it is going to be employees of Sony. It looks like 6,800 individuals had a good amount of sensitive information that was, I just mentioned Move It, that was exfiltrated during the Move It transfer attack. So this was a giant attack in which ransomware gangs, specifically Clop, got in there and exfiltrated tons and tons of information, and then proceeded to attempt to extort these companies. Some of them agreed and paid, some of them did not. And it appears that Sony did not, or if they did, then the ransomware gang is not playing ball. So as a result, this information appears to have been leaked, and it's something that unfortunately is going to be impacting the employees of Sony who were mentioned. But not to fear, they have now been offered credit monitoring and identity restoration through February 29th of 2024. So hopefully nothing bad happens after that date, but you know, what are you gonna do? All right, next up. So this is a piece of good news. Amazon is making MFA mandatory for root AWS accounts by mid-2024. I'm still shocked sometimes that there's controversy with implementing these little like security add-ons for like GitHub repositories that a lot of people follow, or like admin accounts on certain services. But this is something that Amazon previously didn't do. So it's something that for sure, just like I am shocked that it wasn't like a thing that was already implemented, but I'm looking forward to it. I think that it's a good add-on, because a lot of the time we'll see like a low-level vulnerability that ends up being something that escalates because one user manages to get their credentials stolen. If they implement this properly, then that doesn't matter anymore. So
yeah, definitely good news.
All right. So next up, let's see. Okay, so this, again, is a campaign that I've talked about before. It's a Python campaign where malicious actors are trying to include these like typo squatting or other like little changes to popular repositories. And if they get merged, they automatically infect all the other projects that use these libraries. So yeah, it's absolutely a very, very common thing now to have these sorts of open source projects be the target of really sophisticated campaigns where people are trying to not only break into these accounts, they're also stealing or taking ownership of accounts that have previously made like positive contributions to other projects, like basically like trusted, established GitHub repos, and then committing like little fixes or like little things that don't seem like a big deal, but actually import malicious repositories. So if you are somebody that relies on open source projects for your product, then this is exactly how like a really big breach is going to happen, because threat actors have looked at this and looked at the success in the past and they are kind of impressed. They've basically been sold on the idea that this is something worth investing energy into. So yeah, overall, something you can expect to see more of. Right now, this attack is ongoing, and it's something that threat actors have kind of committed to doing. But primarily, this is being used for crypto theft at the moment. So that means loading things that are like, I love these examples of where like they'll go into your clipboard and change out the cryptocurrency address that you're trying to paste. So you're trying to paste someone, like make a payment to someone else. You end up putting in their cryptocurrency address, and the cryptocurrency you meant to send to somebody else ends up going to them instead. Super, super funny. Sorry, not funny, just like a weird attack where like if in the clipboard, taking advantage of the fact that these are like really like long kind of inscrutable addresses, like it's just, you know, it's just kind of an interesting outcome to this very sophisticated attack.
Right.
All right, so another zero-day fix. So this is going to be focused on the mercenary spyware groups. So what can I say? Like they're not very specific about the details of these attacks. This one was a weakness discovered in the XNU kernel, and until this is fully rolled out, they're not going to be releasing proof of concept. They're not going to be releasing like a ton of details about how this is triggered, because this is exploitable. This is something that was previously seen in the wild, and this is something that we've seen 17 0 days exploited in attacks this year, and that's because the economy has kind of shifted to favor these mercenary groups. They're not getting prosecuted. They are in countries where this is legal, and some of the most prominent ones have, you know, either changed their names or otherwise been kind of taken out of the market. So you're seeing these other ones kind of pop up, and that's frankly why we're seeing so much funding for these 0 days to be weaponized. Like prior to this kind of marketplace, like it was maybe not as profitable, or it was easier to you know, like get in trouble, I guess, for like sort of weaponizing these things. But now that it's become more normalized, you can expect to see a lot more CVEs around iPhones and Android devices that are targeted by these mercenary spyware vendors this year. All right. We have 100,000 industrial control systems exposed online. This is not news. This is just a grim fact. So we have always talked about how a lot of these industrial control servers are tempting targets because they rely on pretty basic like industrial control software that is potentially exploitable. Like we've seen it done in the past, and connecting these to the internet is a major problem, especially if these services have known vulnerabilities. So if they're not patched properly and they're still connected to the internet, then as these kind of exploits roll out, it makes it more and more easy for like just basic just basic sorts of I guess like proof of concepts to have a huge impact. So imagine just being able to shut down like tons and tons of factories and other things that are used for critical industry, and not being able to get them back online until they're up and running again. So yeah, I just think that of all the sorts of things that can cause a big impact, industrial control systems are some of the most serious. Seeing how many of them are online is definitely concerning, but also recording the trend as downward overall is encouraging. So the fact that you're able to see that these are things that are a worry, especially because these control our power, they control our water, they control a lot of things. And the United States is at the top of the list for exposed industrial control services. However, it is trending down over time, and you do need to kind of take into account that you know, these companies sometimes struggle to maintain environments that can facilitate production. They are a very slow industry change, and that's to change. And that's something that CISA is kind of like trying to get more and more on top of, like making sure that American industry is able to get warnings for these sorts of things, so that, you know, the next news story that comes out about this isn't that these exposed and vulnerable systems were exploited.
What we're starting to see too is the fact that in a lot of these cases, some of this stuff can't be patched, or the manufacturers have gone out of business. And it's becoming increasingly more common, in my experience, for organizations looking to purchase some of these systems to have a clause in the contract that there must be some level of patching support for, you know, because these things can last forever, potentially, you know, 10, 20, 30 years, even more, depending on what it is, that the company will commit to, you know, supporting it for X number of years, because they're really difficult to replace if there is a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know anybody that's worked in these sorts of environments has probably seen that getting somebody to change something is not going to
Right.
happen on a fast time scale, especially if it risks like other parts of the system going down. So that's why these are so vulnerable. That's why people freak out when this many of them are exposed. It's really just something that is a ticking time bomb when it comes to the impact of these things being shut down when a vulnerability or a proof of concept does come out. All right, so this is a short but interesting story. So Evil Proxy is a tool that a lot of people will use for phishing campaigns. And this is something that was observed in the wild using an Indeed.com open redirect for going after executives. So this is going to be kind of like probably like a remote access broker gang, or like maybe like an espionage group or a state actor. And what they'll do is they will use open redirects they can find to basically mail things for them to try to phish specific targets that are extremely high value. So they were going after, as you can see, electronics components manufacturing, supply chain, insurance providers, banking, properties management and real estate, construction, healthcare, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, accounting, business consulting, and software.
So everyone, huh?
Pretty much everybody that has money. Yeah. So this is going to be like whaling, or like some of the other terms you might have heard to describe going after like very crafted, targeted individuals that would have a big impact if they were breached. So this could lead to like business email compromise or all sorts of other things. So it's a very profitable kind of thing to do. And hackers will take advantage of this sort of thing, or these sorts of open redirects, by creating these phishing campaigns and then using a legitimate server to avoid ending up in the spam box. So like nobody wants to like, you know, like receive an email from like a server that was like just spun up and like nobody knows what it is. Like it's going to end up in some sort of spam folder, like 9 times out of 10. But by being able to take advantage of some of these open redirects that websites accidentally kind of leave lying around, hackers can make it so that their phishing campaigns look super legitimate, which is really cool.
I believe this is also one, if you scroll down a little bit more, I think they were using it for some more nefarious stuff, if I'm remembering correctly, where they basically set up fake, was there a different one that's the fake Microsoft login page? Because I feel like this and that one were fairly well tied together, where they were basically using it as a middleman to pass the Microsoft credentials back, log in, get the MFA token. I can't remember if this is this one or if it's another Microsoft story that we have later on.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that they are using Burp Suite for this because OWASP Zap is so much better. But aside from that, yeah, this is a kind of a interesting kind of window into what exactly a successful attack, like the infrastructure behind it, what's necessary, because this is not sophisticated. Evil Proxy is easy to run. It spins things up immediately. You don't have to have a lot of infrastructure. So kind of like living off the land, as it were, and like borrowing infrastructure from companies that might have like misconfigured like an email server or allowed for attackers to basically mail things through their server. That's exactly how these actually end up being deliverable, because so many defenses now are built on making sure that obvious spam or obvious like signs of phishing email end up in the trash bin. All right. What's up next? So this is something that is emerging as a malware as a service. This is Bunny Loader, and this also shares an. I really, really appreciate that Bleeping Computer has switched over to like fully AI stuff. Wonderful. So Bunny Loader is something that can just kind of be a general purpose tool to install on someone's computer and be able to steal their cryptocurrency, or like monitor their computer, or establish a C2 server and like run commands like from a distance. It can do a lot of stuff. So it can download and execute payloads, log keys, steal sensitive data, cryptocurrency, and execute remote commands. This is kind of the bare bones of what I feel like most people who aren't going to write this themselves, want to get into cybercrime, or want to attack a specific victim are looking for. So you load this onto their computer. It gives you all these capabilities. And again, interestingly, it is pretty focused on attacking like the clipboard. So it's funny to see how people's need to copy and paste things has been targeted so heavily by a lot of these like malware programs. The fact that you can, just as a novice, buy this on Tor, download it, and then like put it on a system, and then have some pretty sophisticated capabilities, including stealing cryptocurrency. Like you don't need to be a genius to run it. You just need to be a scumbag. So that's really what's interesting about this marketplace, is it allows you to buy and utilize these pretty sophisticated tools to steal cryptocurrency and then buy more cyber tools. So ironically, a lot of these can be like either backdoored or otherwise cause whoever wrote the software to get a cut of whatever it is you're doing. That's just kind of the risk of doing business on the darknet. But as things get a better reputation, you tend to find that there are clean versions that are for cyber criminals that are willing to pay. So yeah, overall, interesting to see the capabilities that are built into some of this lower cost, easily accessible stuff you can download relatively easily. All right. So exploit available for critical WS FTP bug. So this has been exploited in attacks, which is the only reason I'm mentioning it, because I have barely heard of Progress Software's WS FTP server. Have you?
Well, Progress Software is the company that made Move It, so.
Ah, damn it. Yeah, they are, aren't they? Yes. Okay, so never mind. I have heard of them. And I have heard of their software before because we keep talking about it on this news program over and over and over. So this was a release of a proof of concept. It was, let's see, a net deserialization. I'm trying to see what the impact was. Oh, yes. And so this was exploited in the wild. So the day that it was released, very predictably, people started using it. Yeah, it's, as far as I know, still unknown as to like what the impact of this has been. I worry that this will turn into another like ransomware bonanza where they just get access to like tons of stuff, especially being that this is an FTP server. So again, they are still dealing with this. There are still updates coming in. So we will probably talk about this more on next week's show. All right, so this is my least favorite story of the week. So there have been a number of, I would describe them as social engineering attacks against elderly people. And it goes something like this. So somebody will contact them and say, hey, hello, I'm a specialist at XYZ Bank, and a hacker has gained access to your account. We're so sorry about this. Like someone from the government will be reaching out to tell you how to secure your funds. And then or maybe they'll give you a number to call. And then a second person will step in and be like, hello, I'm so-and-so from the FBI. We're so sorry this has happened. We've set up like a special bank account just for victims of this crime, and you need to move all of your money into it right now. And the victim will be like, okay, all right, well, I want my money to be safe. So they're like, yeah, well, the hacker's already in your account. So you got to move the money over right now. And then they move their money over. It ends up being an attacker account. And there was no hacker in this scenario. It was just like a con person who was using the fear of a hacker being in their system or having breached them in order to get them to pay a substantial amount of money. So couple notes here at the bottom, I think, like the US government, that they said that they will never demand cryptocurrency. So the FBI will never, ever, ever ask you for cryptocurrency. It's just not something that they're interested in. It's just like, yeah. So unfortunately, the elderly do not know this, and it has become an increasingly popular attack. So as a result, yeah, you can expect to see these sorts of scams like continue to impact people who are vulnerable as information is leaked, and it becomes easier and easier to pose as somebody who does business with these victims. For example, people buying information off the internet where they find out a bunch of different customers for this business that have been breached. There's a whole industry in people who are not tech savvy at all and still make a crazy amount of money running these sorts of scams that go after people who have been, leaked in these sorts of data breaches and creating some sort of context for them to try a scam. So these sorts of attacks happen both high tech and low tech. A lot of the times, these sorts of high tech attacks where a bunch of information will get breached about a company's, customers will then facilitate low tech attacks where people will take that information, buy that information, and attempt some sort of scam like this that involves like gift cards or cryptocurrency. All right, so everybody probably got that FEMA emergency test. I just wanted to confirm that yes, we were not under attack. Kind of interesting to see when you would not have gotten that alert though. So turns out if you were on the phone or if your phone was in airplane mode, then you just wouldn't get it. You just wouldn't apply to your phone. And every tower was transmitting it for about 30 minutes that day. So yeah, just kind of interesting to note that there were some exceptions to everybody getting the notification. If your phone was on airplane mode, you would get it. If you were out of range of one of those towers for at least 30 minutes, you wouldn't get it. And then if you were on the phone, you also would not have gotten the alert. Kind of just interesting to note the variables of when that alert goes out versus when it doesn't. All right, we're almost out of time. So Android released an October update. Some of this was actually related to things that we talked about before.
Yeah.
This was one of them was the ARM Mali GPU driver attack that we talked about like in the beginning of the stream. This was actively exploited. So as a result, you see not only Apple updates for iOS, but also Android updates. So again, zero-day vulnerabilities used to exploit people's phones tends to be mercenary spyware groups, or, you know, back in the day, it actually used to just pretty much mean like nation state-based groups.
Right.
In this case, the tide has kind of shifted, or at least the nation state-based groups are getting better and better at pretending to be like spyware groups that we know about. So, you know, maybe their craft has just improved. So we also have lost trust ransomware. This is something we've seen in the news a little bit as they build their list of victims, but people are pretty sure that this is just the Meta and Cryptor gang. And there's a number of different overlaps here, but it's mostly like they're using the same tools. They have the same techniques. A lot of the times, like one of these gangs will end up hitting a victim that's like a little bit too hot. And like they'll just decide that it's time to fade away, and they'll either split up or rebrand and start hitting people under a new name with new infrastructure and kind of try to distance themselves from that thing that they did that one time. Kind of seems like another case of that. So if you see this new gang, you know, in the news, lost trust, Meta encryptor, possibly the same thing, or at least like some of the same people involved.
This one is the one that kind of relates to the other story we talked about earlier, where I believe that they said in their like about or whatever, the ransomware gang, that they were security researchers, nobody would pay them for their research, so they turned to a life of crime, which very well may just be a sob story and a lie. But this just goes to reinforce that, like, there are security researchers out there, and we need to pay bug bounties, because again, the temptation to sell this, make a lot of money for very little effort potentially is out there. And you know, I can see this easily happening to some, you know, percentage of disenfranchised security researchers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's really like, if you offer, you know, millions of dollars versus a pat on the back, people are often going to take the millions of dollars. Like if they don't care about like what happens after that exploit gets weaponized. So, it's become more and more popular for these bigger companies that are dealing with this PR headache of their supposedly secure products getting hacked over and over. They're starting to allocate more resources towards security researchers and try to tempt them back into reporting them properly. But it's going to continue to be a problem, and we're going to continue to see, a lot of these sorts of exploits first get used by the mercenary spyware gangs and then kind of turn around and get used as just general exploits. All right, so we're over time, but let's see if I have anything else to say about these ones. The Marvin attack. This is a 25-year-old decryption flaw that potentially threatens RSA. Kilian, did you read through this one? Do you have anything to say about it?
No, it's just the fact that this is pretty interesting. It's, you know, from the 90s here, and it's still because I think it has to do with the padding. Oh yeah, there it is, the padding in there. So it can affect, you know, multiple different implementations depending on it. It's not like a one size fits all, but I don't have a whole lot to say about it.
Yeah, me neither. This is just something that's a very old attack. That's something like that you should be aware of if you extensively use cryptography. I don't know, man. This is just kind of one of those attacks where like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop and for them to show me exactly like what the impact is going to be. Obviously, this has the implication of being able to forge RSA signatures. That's like the most obvious one, and potentially read like RSA encrypted text. So that's kind of the most obvious. NATO is addressing an apparent cyber attack. This is a leak that they have not publicly identified like what the source was. It was some documents pertaining to like drone attacks and reconnaissance and some other things in Ukraine. But it was posted on Telegram last week and definitely raised some concerns about whether or not NATO is able to keep an eye on their classified documents. All right, next up, and I think probably finally, Leica Mobile is investigating a customer data leak after a cyber attack that left customers unable to top up their cards and do all sorts of other things. This was, and by cards, I mean like their SIM cards, not, you know. But this was a problem where after the attack, customers were complaining they weren't able to use critical services. And then afterwards, it seems as though this may have been a double exploitation attack where they attempt to do the ransomware and then they also tried to exploit based on the release of data. I haven't seen a claim of responsibility on here. But they have said that they are sure, they're confident that their records are fully encrypted, and yet declined to state the type of encryption. So that makes me a little bit concerned. Another cause for concern is that they used a no index rule that prevented search engines from indexing their statement. So that means that like their statement, this is kind of like a kind of sneaky move that companies do in order to make it so it's harder for people to go back and like look up the statement, because it won't appear in like search engines that are like respecting that no index thing. So you can't go back and see a previous version of it. Frequently when companies like say something they're not like 100% behind, they'll do this. So worth checking out if we see any further like fallout from this, what kind of data was released. They have not clarified the type of customer data being leaked in this case. So yeah, very very concerning story, because we don't know the resolution yet. We don't know how sensitive this information is. We don't know who it pertains to, but we will see more as I'm sure the other shoe drops. Oh yeah, somebody also in our Discord community posted this video that I thought was really funny, which was just how to vet a security researcher's credibility with these 6 rules. And some of them were lean on the credentials, not their accomplishments. How to spot someone who's like inflating. Lean on their credentials and not their accomplishments. So like all the things, that they supposedly worked some secret thing, working on these secret projects. History of making vague, big thing coming soon claims. Does not have any evidence based on history of write-ups. So that means that like whatever they do is like too secret to ever be on GitHub.
Right.
Makes claims about having disclosed security issues. So, a huge stack of CVEs. Claims to be an insider for other large security companies, but won't say which one. Repeating the same class of exploit and claiming that it's new. Okay, so just kind of funny. I want to shout out our Discord community because they are wonderful. And some of the content that they put through, and some of also the stories that I featured this week were from our Discord community. So thank you very much to everybody there. So that is going to be it for this particular live episode of the news. We had a lot of breaches this time. And again, I think my favorite story was still the one where you could upload a malicious AI model and potentially have like customers facing a malicious version of the AI that they're supposed to be working with. So super, super interesting to see how that's evolving and how AI services are starting to be targeted in ways where they're not just trying to like take it down or steal the data behind it. They're actually trying to like potentially replace the AI model that's supposed to be there with like an evil version of it. So very cool, very interesting to keep on top of that. Kilian, thank you for joining us again today. And as always, a big shout out to our sponsor, Varonis. They let us do this every week. So if you want to show everyone that you're watching the stream and that you care about it, you can always go to varonis.com/Kody. That's Kody. And they do check to see if you guys are going. So if you want to support the stream, you can do that for free just by going to that website. And then it will link to all the great content we have. I believe it's actually showing off still the last episode of Speed Data that we posted, which is with one of our security people at Varonis. It's cool to get some of those people on to talk about their careers and how they got into security. And this is a really good one. So check it out. All right, we will see everybody next week. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. And yeah, see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.